Hello, my name is Jerry Benson. I've been a math specialist since 1993 when I got hired in Asheboro Area City Schools in Ohio. I spent 4 years teaching K to 6 math intervention. I spent 10 years teaching 5th grade and where I specialized in all the math for the 5th grade. I did spend 5 or 6 years teaching junior high. A couple of those years were teaching science and advanced science, and 1 year was teaching algebra, 8th grade advanced algebra. I also spent 4 or 5 more years teaching 4, 5, and 6 intervention, and I did do some reading intervention then, but mostly math. Okay, my question has always been, why do students not learn the math? During my first 4 years of teaching math, I had the opportunity to do all the math in 2nd and 3rd grade for 2 or 3 years. And what I found out was they really didn't learn like I thought they would learn. I taught the kids in 2nd grade and I thought I did a really thorough job, and I had the same students in 3rd grade, and it's like starting over again. And my question is, what's wrong? So I then entered a graduate program at Kent State University in their math clinician program, where I studied how students learn math. And coming out of that program, I've got some thoughts on how math should be taught. So when I do my interventions, I really focus on 3 things. Number 1, make sure that they're learning, thinking, discussing, and writing. Number 2, I make sure that they're developing real number sense, not just what I think is number sense. And number 3, I like to combine topics as much as I can, because teaching in isolation is really counterproductive, it's time consuming, and it doesn't really pay off. Goal number 1, learning, thinking, discussing, and writing. Now, I have a lot of students that come to me that are not very good at math, and their parents tell me, oh, we're not good at math either. Well, I really think the biggest problem is we have relied on memorization for our instruction for a lot of years. This goes back probably 150, 170 years. That this is how you do the problem. So just memorize this, memorize a flashcard, and then we'll move on to the next topic. The unfortunate thing is, if you're a poor memorizer, then you get lost. Where do you go? Math is, the way it's taught in our country, is a memorization intense subject. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. We can design tasks and projects that students can learn from, that they can hang on to a concept, and if they temporarily, I can't remember how to do that, and I remember if I do this and I can do this, I can figure the problem out. Then we have good math students. In fact, some of the students that I tutor, when they understand the problem, they excel at math. They did very, very poorly in a classroom because they were not good memorizers, but they understood math then, and they turned out to be very good. Now, even the so-called good memorizers, who we call good math students, sometimes, sometimes they seem to understand math, but they're only memorizing. When I taught 8th grade advanced algebra, I had some of the best students in our town. Now, the problem was, math to these students was very easy. The teacher told them how to do it. They did a few problems, they had it down, and they remembered it. The problem is, we got to some new things that I required them to try to figure out on their own. They couldn't do it. They didn't even want to try. Their whole quote to me was, over and over again that year, just tell me how to do it and I'll do it. Well, to me, that's not being a math student. Math is being able to figure things out. Our goal as teachers is to make students independent of us, not dependent on us. And I think we're failing in that way too. When we based our whole concept of teaching math on memorization, then we're making students dependent on people telling them how to do it, and then they repeating it back to us. That is not a good thing. Giving students more of what does not work does not make sense. That's why when I remediate, I do not then base my remediation on memorization at all. My goal, therefore, is to widen out the amount of students that understand math by giving them good tasks that provide understanding for the mathematical concept. Goal number 2, Developing number sense. Modern children, I don't believe, are getting the number sense at a young age that students in previous generations did. Students traditionally played board games like Monopoly, they played cards, they played dice, they played a lot of things that developed number sense. They helped mom cook, they helped dad build things maybe, or they did a lot of things that just innately developed number sense, and we're not having that. But not only that, is in school, what we're teaching in a mini classrooms is not number sense, it's like the anti-number sense. Students are not developing the size of numbers, they're developing a process of how to do something, but they're not understanding it. And without understanding, you cannot excel. So on a problem like 39 plus 29, we have the kids add the nines first. You do the ones, and then you do the tens, and so on and so forth. So 9 plus 9 is 18. You put the 8 down, you carry the 1, or you regroup, whatever you want to call it. But it's not a 1, it's a 10. And then the students are taught to add the 1 and the 3 and the 2. So they're really memorizing a process. I don't like that because they're not seeing the size of the problem. The 1 is a 10, the 3 is a 30, and the 2 is a 20. And doing math this way, don't matter what you call it, they still don't see the size of the problem. I would tell the students, I want 3 creative ways to solve 39 plus 29. And many times the students would come up with a method such as adding the 30 and the 20 to get 50, and then adding the 9 plus 9 or 18 on top of that, which is an easy problem. Many of the students like to adjust. Instead of saying the 30 plus 20, they would look at it and say, well, I can adjust this, and we can call this 40 plus 30 by adding 1 to each add-in, and then adjusting to the answer. So they would have 40 plus 30 is 70 and take away the 2. Some students will look at it and say, well, we can add 1 to one side and take away from another side, and then we have 40 plus 28 again, another easy addition problem. And students understood this, and they really like doing this because they actually are understanding the problem. They actually see how big the problem is before they even solve it. So if they get a wrong answer, they're at least going to be pretty close. Now, in a traditional math program, when you're just adding the ones first and adding the tens, students really do not know about what the problem is going to be. So doing math this way is really good for estimation as well as for actual computation. I really think the traditional method should be delayed as long as possible. Now, do I disagree with it? No, because I still use it quite often today. But for many problems, I don't. And in primary students, I think that we should delay it, delay it, delay it. They will learn it, but I think it's better if they understand problems before they do the traditional algorithm. The third goal I have is to try to tie concepts together as much as possible. Teaching in isolation really is not as effective as it could be. You know, you teach 2 weeks of this concept, 2 weeks of this concept, 2 weeks of this concept, and by the time you get 3 or 4 or 5 weeks down the road, you have to reteach the first thing because they've forgotten it. So if you can combine things and stretch and teach them throughout the year together, it makes a lot more sense. Now, this works really well in primary. The following third grade example is a really good example how concepts can be combined. Now, if you look at the Ohio Department of Education's critical area of focus, you can see there are 5 of them. Now, I like to focus on the first one as my main thing that I want the students to accomplish through the year, because as a intermediate teacher and years as a 5th grade teacher and even as a junior high teacher, I would want them to really understand multiplication and division. And along with this, to start developing some fluency with their basic facts. This is the one complaint that all intermediate teachers have that I've ever worked with, that students did not understand their basic facts and multiplication division facts and really didn't understand multiplication, especially division. So if we look on the first critical area of focus, it is developing understanding multiplication and division. And notice it does not say to memorize them. It says to develop strategies to understand them. And so that's what I'm going to focus on. Critical area support number 3 supports area number 1 really well. Using rectangles to teach multiplication, division, fractions, and even decimals is really effective. If you look at the 6 by 8 rectangle, you can see it consists of 48 squares. It has 6 rows and 8 columns. Or it could be reversed and it could be 8 rows 8 rows and 6 columns. And this is really an important fact in multiplication. It does not matter what order you look at it, it's still going to have the same answer. And so when you're doing flashcards, instead of having to do 100 different facts, you could cut them in half because of the reversals. 6 by 8 is basically the same thing as 8 by 6, and looking at the rectangle, it's just rotated around. This rectangle can also be used to teach fractions, which is part of critical area 2 and part of critical area focus number 4. This rectangle will be divided into halves, into thirds, fourths, sixths, eighths, and so on and so forth. You can do many more. You can do some more with them, but in 3rd grade, that's all we need to do. Another one of my strategies for teaching basic facts using rectangles is to make smaller rectangles out of the ones shown. For example, a 6 by 8 rectangle can be broken into 2 smaller rectangles, a 5 by 8 and a 1 by 8. And this is really distributive property, introduction to distributive property on a 3rd grade level. You can see the 6th grade level of that, but what happens is students understand their 5s pretty well usually. So if you can latch your multiplication facts onto something that you know, then you can do unfamiliar facts using familiar facts or the familiar fact of 5 times 8. Now, also, let's say we pick a square with a rectangle, this 4 by 4 square. Now, many students don't even know a square number makes a square. So working this way, it really pops out at them. Not only that, but they understand that the 4 is the length of the side, and some of them will start understanding that it is the root of it. You can start using that terminology, although you don't require them to know it in 3rd grade. In conclusion then, if you want a teacher that's going to promote memorizing more things, more flashcards, give worksheets, do little tasks here to build up the bigger task, that's not me. I want to give tasks that make students think. I want to hear their responses or read their responses, because to me that's where math is at. Students that are bored with math, if you give them active tasks that they have to think with, really seem to enjoy math more. Basic fact remediation for me is not designing flashcard or worksheet type problems. It's understanding the size of the problem. It's using rectangles to see that 6 times 8 is 48 or 5 times 4 is 20. They can actually see the size of the problem. Also, I have a thing I call clock 5s, where we learn working our 5s on a clock works really well. There are many ways to do basic facts that are much better than the flashcards that teachers normally hand out. So we try to tie everything together as much as possible, and that way math is much richer. A basic fact just isn't a thing on a flashcard, it ties into other math. So that's really how I look at math remediation or math tutoring. I try to tie everything together and make sense of it for students. So if you wish to contact me, you can contact me at the above there with jerrybensonmath@gmail.com. I'll be on Facebook pretty soon, and also Wix. Thank you.